Hi, I'm Catherine Ayers-Wickenhauser, and I'm so excited to be joined today by Jocelyn Keegan, one of our most recently recognized interoperability heroes. Jocelyn, welcome. Will you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Sure, I'm super excited to be here, and thank you so much for Direct Trust and whoever it is out there that put my name forward. It's great to be here, and I think it's really important the work that you're doing to elevate folks in industry that are out there trying to make this stuff real. So I grew up in product management, and I'm a software development person by background. And I actually started my career in the financial information technology segment. And I think it's important to talk about that a little bit because I actually moved into healthcare when I came back to work after having my kids, because I had read Atul Gawande's books, like Complications, and I had read a lot of Clayton Christensen's writing at the time about what we really need to do to fix US healthcare. And I kind of took this like, oh, I have skills, I can fix stuff kind of approach, and made a decision when I went back to work that I wanted to make sure I was like making the world a better place, as opposed to just making rich people richer. And what I learned was the problems were all the same. And I had actually spent the late 90s and early 2000s really with that first wave of change of us moving to APIs as really across all industries except for healthcare. And so could see a lot of the applicability of the things that I had learned and working in large complex organizations and sort of de-siloing them, and de-siloing the technology, that this work was possible. And I'm a big dork. I'm a believer that individuals make change happen, and read a lot. And my gut feeling was that there were problems in healthcare that could be solved, that I could bring them to bear, and landed in U.S. healthcare back in 2010, and have been working really sort of at this collision of where data exchange needs to happen, and sort of the technical limitations have gotten increasingly uh, knocked down, and am really excited about the point that we're at now in my role at Point of Care Partners. I've really been at sort of the nexus of the payers and providers, and being enabled to solve some of the real world business challenges that they've had. The tech is there now. It wasn't there before, to solve some of these problems. And I'm excited about sort of where we are and the work that I get to do in industry. So Point of Care Partners spends its time really at the intersection of where I'd say strategy, product development, and technical enablement collide with sort of the work that's happening out in the industry from a policy and a regulatory standpoint. And I get to work with individual organizations on the payer and the provider side on a daily basis. And I get to do really interesting industry work, like the work I get to do running the Da Vinci Project, which is really focused on how are we building standards for US healthcare, to be able to move to value-based care. So.
And I was going to say, I think, when we hear your name in this industry, we associate you so closely with HL7's Da Vinci Project. And so to me, in this standards and convener world too, it feels like we're always hearing about the Da Vinci Project. And so I'm curious if you can talk a little bit more about your work there and what's made it successful too.
Yeah, it's been interesting because um, I think that the business problems we're trying to solve for Da Vinci are not new problems, right, between payers and providers. I think that the industry and the shift of the industry, from a business model perspective, um, was already in play and already happening, right? We had MIPS and MACRA put in place by our colleagues at CMS, to really start to, I'd say, push folks into value-based contracting. And I think that one of the things I think that made Da Vinci a little bit of a lightning in a bottle, I think, is we walked into a vacuum, right, of a place for providers and payers and the vendors that support them to be able to really do the innovation work that was necessary. They needed common tools and vocabularies and ways to talk to each other. And I think FHIR presented that opportunity, because people knew the business model was shifting, but that we didn't have any of the rails in place in order for that work to happen. And so, I like to refer to it as sort of the party of the willing. But, I think looking at the progress that the Argonaut project had made in opening up the EHRs and getting the EHRs to adopt emerging standards, as part of meaningful use, there was this group that said, could we make this happen? And could we do what Argonaut did between freeing data out of the EHRs for patients? Could we do the same thing between payers and providers? And I think that collaborative sort of mindset from the very beginning of the conversation, sort of borrowing from the work that was already happening in industry, allowed people space to be able to go first and to speak up and to raise their hands and volunteer. And, I want to be clear, this is the work of many. And I think we started with the idea if we could do one or two use cases, we could figure out how to share data for medication reconciliation, and we could tackle some of the challenges around prior authorization, that would be a win. If you told us fast forward 6 or 7 years that we'd have 12 IGs in implementation guides, sort of moving towards becoming final standards and being referenced in proposed federal regulation, and that the industry would be, sort of chomping at the bit to adopt some of these technologies, I think all of us at the very beginning of the project would be gobsmacked. But I think that, again, there was a place and a need. And because I think we set it up in a way that was equitable and that people could collaborate and come with their best ideas, we were able to be successful. And I think that's important, right? Because it was literally people in individual roles inside of organizations making the decision on top of their day jobs, right? Or getting the bandwidth and the permission to go and do this work, to lean in and say, this day I'm going to do a little bit more to do that extra work to move this thing forward. Because momentum is so key when you're talking about these sort of large scale influence-based projects.
And that's one of my favorite things about also being a convener in this space, right. and comparing notes with other conveners too, just really, like you described it, that lightning in a bottle and having those different perspectives together, but really working towards a common goal. And often in this industry, you referenced 2010 when you really got started here. And I was right around that time too, 2010, 2011 with meaningful use and all of that. And so sometimes to me, I think we don't give ourselves enough credit with how far we've come. And you just mentioned that, with the implementation guides, but we also know that there's so much more work to do, right? And that's why we're here. And that's what we're trying to do. And so I'm curious, especially because you've been through this kind of in a parallel industry. What's your take on the transformation that's happening and kind of where we're at right now with transformation?
Yeah, I think it's so hard. There's so many things that are just unique about US healthcare, that really stem from that payment model and how we pay for care as US citizens, and also what we put up with as actual participants in the US healthcare market. That I think buck against sort of, I think what we would think would be the logical progression of how you'd use technology to make things better. It's a stark contrast from financial information tech, right? Where you could, in information tech, if you could prove this much improvement in data or access to data or information, somebody would pay you this much money, right? Sort of per seat, per user to get that information, because it gave them an advantage from a trading perspective in the market or in positioning, what companies they were going to invest in. That's radically different in US healthcare. It's highly regulated in the way that we share and exchange data. In some ways, some of the existing constructs, like HIPAA from a law perspective, have been maybe used more as a mantle to protect and not share data. And so we're seeing those big levers go into place, right, with the 21st Century Cures Act sort of being rolled out and, starting to see whispers of enforcement across a number of regulatory places. But I think we're at a really interesting point, sort of how hard it was to get started in US healthcare, that, we're really at I think an unprecedented, probably in the last 20 or 30 years since HIPAA first rolled out, amount of regulation that's coming between at least the payer and the provider side of the market, from ONC and both from CMS, that's providing a lever, right, for people to move to action. But I also think that we're seeing the impacts of the changing business model and other industries, other folks from, sort of bigger parts of the information industry coming into market. And so the competitive landscape really changing, where now all of a sudden it's not just about adopting technology to be compliant, but it's about who's setting themselves up to be differentiated from their competitors, or to be easier to work with, or to be better partners, or organizations making themselves more holistically owning sort of soup to nuts sort of a patient relationship, across the whole care continuum. So I think that the work is changing, and the world that we live in from a regulatory lens is changing. And with the rise of, and I don't want to say fire completely, because it's really about the move to real time and API, that ability to be able to have data flow like every other part of our world. We get information, sort of at our fingertips when we need it. I think that all of those things coming together are allowing, at least I think, the thought leaders in the advancing organizations to start to show promise that we really can use technology to solve these business problems. And, I use examples, when I do my Da Vinci presentations, but even when we do our consulting work with clients, that the returns on both sort of employee time and savings and impact to client, patients getting access to care faster when you adopt some of this technology. Now that those proof points are starting to come out, they're kind of stupid simple, right? But there's a lot of momentum that had to be created or coming, in these large complex organizations to actually get them to pick up and start to adopt some of these new workflows. And I would say, really importantly, not just the technology, but the business process and the people changes that need to happen, because it's not just about adopting new technology. It really is about individuals inside of these organizations being the thought leaders to go first, and the relationships in those organizations between payers and providers of the people that are doing this work are fundamentally different than historic sort of conventional wisdom or precepts about what a payer provider relationship is changed, because the business model is helping to drive that. And the technology is enabling people to be, I'd say, more equal in their relationships.
And I think that's so key, is noting that this is not just a technological transformation. Right. And I think, so often, so many of us look at that and that continuum of, do we have the technology? Do we have the infrastructure? But like you just said, it's not just an infrastructure issue. It's not just a standards or technology issue. It is a people issue, a workflow issue. And we're certainly seeing that come out more and more and more of, okay, we've built these things, but are they usable? How are they usable? How do we see increase in adoption too? And I like what you said about, it's not just organizations, it's really individuals who are participating not only in these groups, but also participating in terms of taking the first step and kind of being the one to test something out. And I'm curious if you can tell us more about that. So from your perspective, what have you seen is kind of that first step? Like, what's the first thing that people do to really be the ones that test this out?
So I think it's important when we talk about all of this work. And I think that, to me, it is about the people, right? Because the technology part, while it's challenging and hard, and sort of justifying and building the business case for investments is challenging inside of large, complex organizations, it is people that actually make the work happen and absorb that first wave. So I want to say one thing flat out. We don't have enough people in the industry to do this work. And the work that we're doing out in the round, that your team is doing and my teams are doing, and the industry projects that we're involved in, are fundamentally building the people to do this work for the next 20 or 30 years, right? So I have these really strong held beliefs that if you're not uncomfortable in your current job, then you're not growing. And I think that for people that want to grow and that want to be challenged and want to figure out sort of what the next thing is that they should be doing, this is a really great opportunity to sort of dive in and get involved. Because I think that, not everybody can do everything, but, part of what we've been doing, and, not just in Da Vinci, but in a lot of the industry work and the consulting work I do, is helping to build the people with the right skill sets to do this sort of work in the round, this collaborative type of projects that you need to, sort of be comfortable to be able to facilitate, to be able to speak up, to be able to participate. And so I always tell folks, sort of figure out what you're really good at. What's your core skill set that you can bring to the table? Are you an architect type? Are you an analyst? Are you somebody that really understands sort of the workflow for a particular business problem? Do you have really strong leadership skills? And then figure out sort of, okay, based on that, where can I go? Where is a place that I feel passion, or that is a really sticky wicket for my organization, and go and be present and participate. Because if you're not, then you're just sort of there and stagnating. And so I think it's important when we think about sort of like how you spend your days, right? 2,000 odd hours that we all spend working every year, what is the impact and the difference that you're making? And there's plenty of opportunity out here, whether it be at working on a specific use case to be the first person to pick up that guide in your org and start to socialize it, whether it be working with your provider team or your payer team to figure out which one of these projects you might want to do first, given what your strategic priorities are, or whether it be, hey, I just know that I'm really good at governance and I want to figure out, making sure that the decisions that we're making out in industry are the right decisions from a policy perspective. Well, then put that hat on and sort of come out and get involved. There's a part for everyone. And but like the water is warm, like everybody's eager to help onboard other people and take advantage of the knowledge that they're bringing or the expertise they're bringing, but bootstrap each other, sort of as we learn how this new, sort of new world is going to work.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of camaraderie here. Like, there, like you said, the water's warm. And I certainly have felt that in my experience too, of people willing to help each other, even if they're adjacent projects or
Right.
not necessarily the same business problem. So I love that perspective of thinking about, what you can bring to the table and looking at different skill sets and how you would develop those to really kind of broaden this work in multiple arenas. And I think there's so much to unpack here and so many great thoughts. And just thinking through, as we come to the conclusion of our conversation, if you had to summarize or provide any final thoughts or words of wisdom, what would you say?
So I think that we are at a unique point in time in the healthcare industry, especially around information technology, right? We're in an inflection point where we have this sort of wave of regulation that's happening, right? That's going to bring sort of the willing and the unwilling along. And I think that each of us individually has a role to play there. And I think you need to decide sort of, do you want to be a change agent inside of your organization? Do you want to be out in industry, sort of getting more involved and helping to drive where we're headed as an industry? There's sort of a piece part for everyone. And there is a wealth of individuals that are already out here that are more than happy to help you find where you should be, but you should be doing something because the onus is on us to actually fix U.S. healthcare. I have a million analogies, but I think at the end of the day, right, that if in order for us to create the momentum and the proof points, which we're doing, right, there's people out here doing this, to come and join folks that are doing that, you have to figure out sort of like, where is the point where your skill set, your organizational business problems, and your potential partners sort of coalesce and dive in, get involved and step up and be part of the change.
So, well, you heard it from Jocelyn. Step up, be part of the change. Jocelyn, thank you so much for the time today. And congratulations again on being recognized as an interoperability hero. To find more Interop Hero videos like this, visit directtrust.org/interophero.